Здравствуйте, товарищи. Welcome back to Russian Through Propaganda. We're on day 10, the end of chapter 1, and today we're looking at demonstrative pronouns. So this topic is pretty easy, actually. We have very few new forms to learn, but there are some things that can be quite confusing, surprisingly so, actually. But keep in mind that, as with so many other things in Russian, the confusion really sets in when we start looking at the English too closely. So even though we give some translations, we need to really look at what the Russian's doing, which is very simple, and try to avoid letting the English confuse us. So let's look at a painting, rather famous one. It's called Novaya Moskva. The artist's familia is Pimenov. This is from 1937. And if we supplied a little caption, it might read, "Это Moskva." "Это Moskva," right? This is Moscow. Then we could add a second sentence, "Этот город столица России." This city is the capital city of Russia. Okay, so there's our topic today in a nutshell. We've got the pointing word, which we've been using already. For example, "Это Moskva," we're sort of pointing here, in this case, at the painting and saying this is Moscow. And we know that the pointing word "это" never changes its form, right? It doesn't have gender. It doesn't agree with the gender of any noun in the sentence. But now we're seeing a new form today, a demonstrative pronoun that does change its form. And we see that it's closely related to the pointing word. It looks a lot like it. Here we have the masculine form, "этот," modifying "город," "этот город." Okay, so you can see one point of confusion today is going to be just remembering that there's a difference between the pointing word "это," which never changes, and these new demonstrative forms, meaning this, which do change, and they modify a noun like any adjective. So "этот город" would mean this city, or potentially that city. So more on that in a moment. All right, so let's look at the forms here, and we see that the main word we want to learn today is this, "этот," "это," "это," right? Now you see that the neuter form looks exactly like the pointing word, so there is this ambiguity, and that's one reason for the confusion. But we can see that this word, this, is an adjective, right? It has a masculine, feminine, and neuter form, so it's going to agree with whatever it's referring to. Now, the next form, "tot," "ta," "to," we can see that it's really the same form, basically, without the "a" at the beginning. And we can translate that as that, right? So "этот," "это," "это" means this, "tot," "ta," "to" means that. But the "tot," "ta," "to" forms are not nearly as common in Russian as that is in English. And the reason is that basically where we would say this or that in English, kind of depending on the proximity of whatever it is we're talking about in time and space, Russians use "этот" by default. So whenever in English we would say this or that, Russians would tend to say "этот." And again, another way to put that would be that "этот," "это," "это," the word on top there, could translate as this or that depending on the context. So when would they use "tot," "ta," "to"? Only in a really emphatic sense, right? So only when they're being very emphatic and saying that thing over there, like way over there, or if they're comparing this with that, right? Then you would want a clear distinction, and you would talk about this thing versus that thing using "tot," "ta," "to." Okay, so let's look at just some examples. And here we do have comparisons, so we're seeing both the this and that form in Russian. "Этот ключ новый, а тот старый." So ключ, masculine, right? So we've got "этот." Now again, these are special modifiers, so that these adjectival forms certainly don't look like normal adjectives, so they're just a little bit peculiar. But "этот" is the masculine form. "Этот ключ старый," "этот ключ новый," this key is new, while on the other hand, right, "а тот старый," that's old, that one is old. Okay, by the way, the word "ключ" is understood in that second clause, but it's not needlessly repeated, right? If we flesh that out, it would be "Этот ключ новый, а тот ключ старый." But of course, like in English, we don't usually repeat words needlessly. A feminine example, "Эта книга новая, а та старая." "Это та," right? Speaking of книга. And finally, neuter, "Это платье новое, а то старое." Again, we omit the second noun, right, as we just mentioned, "Этот ключ новый, а тот ключ старый." And again, even though we may omit the noun in that second clause, we're still talking about a key, right? So even if the noun itself is not present, if, for example, we know what we're talking about, but that thing we're talking about happens to be masculine, then everything has to be masculine. Here's a quick poster. Искореним это зло. We will eradicate this evil. Okay, so there's an example. We see the word это, and we're wondering, is that a pointing word or does it mean this? And sometimes context, well, obviously context is the only thing that can tell you really, right? Because the form itself may look the same. And in this case, we have a neuter noun, zlo. Zlo means evil. And so, right, it's impossible to tell just looking at the form eta whether it's simply the pointing word or a demonstrative pronoun, this or that. And of course, in the poster, the woman is actually, she's literally pointing. But if we look at the context, eta zlo, the eta clearly modifies zlo. This phrase just doesn't make any sense otherwise, right? Искореним это зло. We will eradicate this evil, это зло. Namely alcoholism, right? Alcoholism. This is one of many anti-alcoholism posters that we'll see in Soviet propaganda. Okay, so let's fill in some blanks. First, starting with этот. And just remember again that этот would do the work of both this and that by default in English, unless we're using that in a really emphatic way. So this Russian museum, этот русский музей. Этот русский музей. Again, that could translate as that Russian museum, depending on context. This Russian book, feminine, это русская книга. 3, this new pen, feminine, это новая ручка. 4, ужасный фильм, this terrible movie, right, masculine, этот ужасный фильм. 5, this boring Russian article, это скучная русская статья, feminine. 6, this old newspaper, это старая газета. 7, another masculine, интересный журнал, an interesting magazine, этот интересный журнал. 8, this terrible idea, this horrible idea, это безобразная идея. 9, this huge room, это огромная комната. 10, this unusual painting or picture, это необычная картина. And 11, this expensive dress, neuter, это дорогое платье. Now you may have noticed as we went through those examples that when you pronounce the feminine eta and the neuter eto, normally with vowel reduction, you can't hear the difference, right? So eta is the feminine demonstrative pronoun and eta is also the neuter. So there's no difference because those final unstressed and o, they're both reduced to an sound. Okay, now let's do some contrasts. And here we would use tot, ta, to for that in this emphatic way. So for example, этот словарь большой, а тот маленький. This dictionary is big while that one is small. Remember the use of there. We could translate as whereas or while, right? This dictionary is large while that one is small. 12, this car is expensive while that one is inexpensive. Эта машина дорогая, а та дешевая. 13, this window is clean while that one is rather dirty or quite dirty. Это окно чистое, а то довольно грязное. 14, this film is interesting while that one is boring. Этот фильм интересный, а тот скучный. Okay, don't forget the T's there on the right. Этот фильм, а тот скучный. 15, this lamp is ordinary while that one is very old. Эта лампа обычная, а та очень странная. Sorry, strange. I misread that. Странная means strange. 16, this assignment is difficult while that one is easy. Neuters. Это задание трудное, а то легкое. 17, this work is easy while that work is hard. Эта работа легкая, а та трудная. 18, this towel is clean while that one is dirty. Neuter. Это полотенце чистое, а то грязное. 19. This museum is huge while that one is small. Этот музей огромный, а тот маленький. 20. This bicycle is expensive while that one is cheap. Этот велосипед дорогой, а тот дешевый. Okay, let's look at more detail. Look in more detail at this problem I mentioned earlier, right? That if you start taking these very simple constructions we've learned so far in Russian, and you start comparing the translations that may be possible in English, you can get very confused very quickly. And so let's just look at several examples and try to get really clear about what the Russian's doing. Again, we're giving translations, and it's important to know how to translate these things. But again, for purposes of learning Russian, sometimes English can be more of a hindrance than a help. Let's look at one more poster. Это не мое дело. Okay, again, that same problem. We have the word это, and just looking at the spelling, we don't know. Is that the pointing word, or is that the demonstrative, meaning this or that? And here again, we have дело, a neuter noun, so that just further complicates the problem, right? So we have to just think about context, right? Now here, the eta is separated from дело, right? Normally, if you had an adjective modifying a noun, it would come right before the noun. So that's our main clue here, that eta, this is actually the pointing word. Eta, and you see she's pointing at eta, right? This cleaning that grandma is doing here. Это не мое дело. This is not my business, or that is not my business, right? Just pointing at it. Again, it's clear that this young lady does not respect her grandmother's trud, right? This business of having respect for labor, for other people's labor, and also, of course, doing labor yourself. That was one of the highest ideals in the Soviet Union. Okay, so let's look at just a few very simple examples. The pointing word versus the demonstrative pronoun. So remember, the pointing word is just pointing. We've talked a lot about that, and it never changes. So here we've got a masculine, feminine, neuter example. Note how, of course, the pointing word doesn't change. Это новый стол, это новая книга, это новое окно. Now the demonstrative pronoun, this, again, it could mean that, depends on context. It does modify an adjective. It modifies a noun. It works like an adjective modifying a noun, and therefore it changes like any other adjectival word would in Russian. For example, этот стол новый, эта книга новая, это окно новое. Okay, so just take a moment and again look really carefully at the Russian. Этот, это. Those words are modifying nouns. They change to agree with the noun's gender. Okay, let's take another set of examples to compare the pointing word versus the demonstrative pronoun. But here we have past tense, and this points out something that's also rather confusing. Look at the pointing word examples. Это был новый стол. Это была новая книга. Это было новое окно. It's very easy, especially if we look at the English, to think that the eta is the subject of the Russian sentence. And in the present tense, it's even easier to think that. But look at the verbs here in the past tense. We see that they're changing to agree with what is actually the subject, and that is the noun, right? So that these examples show us that eta can never serve as the subject of a sentence. Even though it may often really look like that's what it's doing, it's not the subject, it's just this pointing gesture. So look, for example, stole is our subject in the first example, and therefore our verb is был. Книга in the second one, therefore the verb is feminine, была. In the third example, окно, and there we have neuter, было. Okay, so compare that with some demonstrative pronouns, again, just in the past tense. Этот стол был новый, эта книга была новая, это окно было новое. Let's look at one more set of examples. With the pointing word, это стол, это книга, это окно. And there are several ways this could translate. Again, it could be, this is a table, this is a book, this is a window. That would be sort of the default, I suppose. But depending on where the thing is that we're sort of pointing at, this could also mean be translated as that's a table, that's a book, that's a window. In some cases, sentences like this may even translate using it. Like, what is that? It's a table, it's a book, it's a window, right? Now, again, in the Russian, if we have it as the subject, that's going to be on, она, оно, right? So, он новый, она новая, оно новое. Uh, so again, this is a tricky topic because again, any one of these simple sentences, they seem rather innocent and very straightforward, but when we start translating them into English, depending on the context, we can get all sorts of variations. And when students start thinking about that, they get very confused about the Russian. So I think if you look over these examples, you'll see that the Russian is actually very simple. We've explained it quite thoroughly, and hopefully you're used to it by now. Okay, a few more examples. Это хорошая машина. Again, that can mean that's a nice car, right? So это, the pointing word can mean this is or that is. Just depends on the context. I compare that with эта машина хорошая. There's the demonstrative pronoun, right? This car is good or nice. Now, again, that can also mean that car is nice, right? Because we're using these forms этот to mean this or that by default. Now, again, we will use the Russian that, to, ta, to, in an emphatic sense, right? In comparisons, for example. Эта машина новая, а та старая. Okay, look at a few more examples. Это хорошая идея, that's a good idea. Это была хорошая идея, that was a good idea. Эта идея была хорошая, that idea was a good one. Это будет хорошо, that will be good. Okay, those are all examples of how in any of these sentences, although we're using это and этот, they could easily translate into English using that. So we have to focus on the Russian and not get sidetracked by the English. Okay, let's fill in a few more blanks. First column here is just using the pointing word. This is a new book, or that is a new book. And then we're switching to the demonstrative. This book is new, or that book is new. And then finally using the pronoun, it is new, or whatever. Okay, with stool, это старый стул. This is a new table. Chair. This is a new chair. This chair is new. Этот стул новый. Or let's stick with старый, actually. So let's say this chair is old. Этот стул старый. Okay, let's say it is old. Он старый. Again, in the present tense, we don't need the linking verb usually. Два. This is a big table. Это большой стол. This table is big. Этот стол большой. It is big. Он большой. Три. This is a new pen. Это новая ручка. This pen is new. Это ручка новая. It is new. Она новая. Четыре. This is a new telephone. Это новый телефон. This telephone is new. Это телефон новый. It is new. Он новый. Masculine. Пять. And a cheap dress or an inexpensive dress could mean either. Это дешевое платье. Okay, that's the pointing word. That's the way we're using it there, at least. Now again, there are some ambiguities, right? Это дешевое платье could mean this inexpensive dress, right? But so it really depends on how you're using it when you have these cases of ambiguity with это. Okay, but here again, we're using it to mean in the sense of a pointing word. This is a new dress. Это дешевое платье. This dress is inexpensive. Это платье дешевое. So keeping the very same form, but here we're using it as the demonstrative. This dress or that dress. It is inexpensive. Оно дешевое. Okay, let's now do something similar, but in the past tense. And here, again, what is actually the subject is a bit clearer. This was a new chair. Это был старый стул. Okay, so look at your verb был, right? It shows that the subject is stool, not это. This chair was old. Этот стул был старый. Этот стул был старый. It was old. Он был старый. Семь. It was a big table. Это был большой стол. Again, subject is masculine, stol, the verb is был, there in the past tense. This table was big. Этот стол был большой. It was big, он был большой. 8. It was a new pen. Это была новая ручка. Это была новая ручка. Ручка is the feminine subject. This pen was new. Эта ручка была новая. It was new. Она была новая. 9. It was a new telephone. Это был новый телефон. This telephone was new. Этот телефон был новый. It was new. Он был новый. 10. It was an inexpensive dress. Again. Это было дешевое платье. This dress was inexpensive. Это платье было дешевое. It was inexpensive. Оно было дешевое. Okay, and these examples in the past tense, it's another good example in the first column there. You see how this would translate probably into English with it, right? It was a new book. What was that thing yesterday? Well, it was a new book. You could say that was a new book, but it sounds maybe a little bit less natural than it was a new book, right? Using it. But again, you see how if we focus on the English there, we might want to use on, ana, ano there in that first column, but that's not really what we're saying there in the Russian. We're using the pointing word. So I guess you get the picture by now. You really need to look at the Russian and try not to think about the English in your head. Okay, we can wrap up today's lesson with a few other expressions that are formed off of these demonstratives, especially taught. So taught means that one, emphatically that, but it can also mean like the one we've been talking about, or even the right one, the one we want, the one we talked about, the one I needed, the one, that kind of thing, the right one. For example, это тот словарь, okay, literally, is this that dictionary? Kind of in the sense of, is this the dictionary? Is this the right dictionary? Is this the dictionary you talked about? That kind of idea. Да, тот, yep, that's it, that's the one. Or нет, не тот, right? No, it's not the one, meaning it's the wrong one, or it's a different one. Это та газета, is this the newspaper? Да, та, yep, that's the one. Нет, не та, it's not that one, it's the wrong one. And a neuter example, это то платье, right? Is this the dress? Is this the right dress? Да, то. Нет, не то. Okay, so let's practice this a little bit. Is this the right book? Это та книга. Let's say, no, it's not the right one. It's a different one. And here we're using, I think, a new adjective we haven't seen. Другой is an unstressed adjective meaning different or a different one. So we're going to treat it just like большой or плохой. Okay, let's say, is this the right book? Right? Это та книга, and now это не та книга, это не та, это другая. Okay, again, we're using the pointing word это, right? Talking about this book. Два, number 2, is this the magazine? Это тот журнал. Нет, не тот, это другой журнал. 3, is this the soap? Это то мыло. Нет, не то. Это другое мыло. 4. Is this the right newspaper? Is this the newspaper? Это та газета. Нет, не та. Это другая. 5. Is this the key? Is this the right key? Это тот ключ. Нет, не тот. Это другой. 6. Is this the museum? Это тот музей. Нет, не тот. Это другой. 7. Is this the place? Or is this the seat in the theater or something? Это то место. Нет, не то. Это другое. 8. Is this the umbrella? Это тот зонт. Нет, не тот. Это другой. You may have noticed in those questions, again, in questions in Russian, the intonation rises and falls sharply on whatever word is the focus of the question. So here we're asking, Is this the dictionary, right? Is this the right dictionary? That's kind of the point of the question. And so we said, for example, это та книга, right? Rising very sharply, very noticeably on whatever the main question, the main word is in the question. Okay, we can similarly say the same one versus a different one using a similar construction with tort. Again, look these over. Это та книга. Да, та. Это тот словарь. Нет, не тот. Right, so we kind of practiced that here already. Now, if we want to emphasize that something is the same, right, the very same, we can add an emphatic particle, je. So, for example, tot zont, right, that umbrella, or the right umbrella, or the umbrella that we talked about, or whatever. We can say tot je zont, and that adds emphasis. I think this is the first time we've seen this emphatic particle je. It's used all over the place in Russian, and it always lends emphasis to whatever word comes before it. So we'll have to talk about this later, but it's used all the time in Russian. Here, again, it's really putting emphasis on tot, meaning this is the very same umbrella. To be even more emphatic, you can throw in an adjective samый, and we get this little construction, tot je samый, meaning the exact same. So that's extremely emphatic, the exact same umbrella. And again, we see here that the tot and the samый, those are adjectival forms. They're agreeing with zont. Ta kniga, ta же книга, та же самая книга. То место, то же самое место. The very same place or the very same seat. For example, это тот же мяч. Да, тот же. Нет, это другой мяч. So there's how we'd say it's a different ball, right? Using другой. Это то же самое место. Is this the same seat? Very emphatically. Да, то же самое. Yep, the very same one. Or нет, это другое. Okay, one final example using je again with the demonstrative pronoun, the demonstrative adjective takoi. Takoi is like kakoi. So we've had the question word kakoi, meaning what kind of, and any question word in Russian is going to have some kind of demonstrative counterpart. We'll talk more about this later. The demonstratives usually start with a t, a te. So for example, if kakoi is a question word asking what kind of, takoi is a demonstrative that points out what kind of. It means like one like this or one like that, right? Takoi, and it has this pointing quality. So, for example, какой у тебя ключ? Такой? What kind of key do you have? One like this, and we're pointing, right, this kind of a key. Да, такой, yes, one like that. Now we can add je to that. Again, it adds more emphasis to the word that comes in front of it. And the resulting expression means the same kind of, sort of like we were doing earlier. But instead of saying that it's the same one, we're saying it's simply the same kind of. У меня такой же ключ. I've got the same kind of key. У меня такой же ключ, как у тебя. There we're adding a little bit more, right, with как, meaning I have the very same kind of key, как у тебя, as at you, the same key as you do. Here's a poster. А ты не такой, right? Are you not like this? And you see he's literally pointing, right, with this demonstrative adjective такой. Are you not like this little brat who goes around not helping old women carry their groceries, or shooting people with slingshots and cheating on tests and all this stuff? So again, here we have a young, upstanding pioneer who's pointing out bad behavior and shaming those who engage in it, right? There's sort of a lot of pointing and shaming and things like this in a lot of these Soviet posters. Okay, let's quickly fill in a few blanks here. For example, это тот же словарь. Is this the same dictionary? Да, тот же. Okay, then we can ask similarly, is this the same kind of dictionary using такой? Это такой же словарь? Да, такой же. Okay, so it's like a broken record, this chapter, right? We've got to look at the noun we're thinking about and make sure everything that's adjectival, modifying it, agrees with its gender. Это тот же плакат? Is this the same poster? Да, тот же. Now let's skip over to 4 and ask, is this the same kind of poster? Yes, the same kind of poster. Это такой же плакат? Да, такой же. 2, number 2. Is this the same painting or picture? Это та же картина? Да, та же. Skipping to 5, number 5. Is this the same kind of painting or picture? Это такая же картина? Да, такая же. And 3. Это тоже платье? Is this the same dress? Да, тоже. Is this the same kind of dress? Это такое же платье? Да, такое же. Okay, so that wraps it up for chapter 1. We've learned quite a bit already. Next chapter, if you're feeling bored, you won't be in the next chapter. We're going to learn all kinds of stuff. We're going to pick up 2 new cases, the accusative and the genitive, and we're going to learn a lot about Russian verbs. Really, quite a lot about Russian verbs indeed. So it'll be challenging, but we'll learn a lot. Anyway, until then, до свидания, товарищи.